Okay, cool. We're back. Tonight we're talking about what ideal readers and reading like a writer, um, which is one of my favorite books by Francine Prose. Just because I think it's full of like tips for how to read, not just how to read critically, but how to read with an eye to craft, like how different things are being put together on the page.
Yeah,
But
I really love that book too, and especially her examples. I thought she chose like really good, interesting, unusual books to use as her examples.
yeah, I feel like we connected around that book pretty early on in our friendship. I was trying to think the other day, like, how long have we known each other? It's
Yeah, since 2004, 2005, maybe
Wow, so it's almost been 20
right
years,
around
right?
there. Yeah, wow.
It's getting close. Um, so yeah, I feel like that book was really formative for us both, like being in kind of what rural Utah, I mean, I guess kind of rural Utah, small town in Utah, small city in Utah, and really kind of wondering like how do you do this writing thing? Where do you go to next? And I feel like that if I was to say like one book that taught me almost everything that I needed to learn prior to doing an MFA or something like that, that might be the one book. Um, I heard a quote the other day that was like it was like a baseball quote. I don't remember who said it, but it was like mediocre players just want to fly under the radar. Good players want to be coached and told that they're doing a good job, and like excellent players want to be told the truth. Um, and I feel like Francine Prose's book is like once you get past like because initially for me like writing was like it was more of like an identity crisis thing, at the very beginning. Um, and it was like I mean I was struggling with with drug addiction. I was struggling with depression and who knows what all like mental health type stuff. And Artist Way, I feel like that was the book that was like, as a mediocre artist, I needed Artist Way. Like that was like I just need to be told, like I just how do I survive? You know what I mean? Like how do I just kind of fly under the radar? Um, and then trying to think, the one like just like want to be told like you're doing a good job and be coached. It was probably Gordon Allred, who was a professor there at Weber. Like I feel like he would like if a chicken came up to him and it had scratched something in the dirt, Gordon Allred would be like, "Good job, keep it up." You know, and I
Yeah,
say that with love. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
he was a
He was
great coach.
encouraging.
He was a super encouraging individual. Um, but then Francine Prose, I feel like that was the truth. That was like here's a dose of the truth. Here's what it's really like. Um, there's other books I can think of that sit in that area for me, but that was a big one. Um, and yeah, the reason I want to hear your thoughts on this too. Like, so the reason I feel like that book is so important is because it encourages you to sit in the reader's chair as though you were a writer. But I think the script can also be flipped because everything ostensibly, ideally, everything that we do as writers is in service to the reader. So, but it's a difficult thing because most of the time we're just sitting in these rooms by ourselves, right? If we're honest.
Yeah.
So, how do you get yourself in the headspace or the heart space or in the space where you're imagining, or how do you relate yourself to the reader of a text that you're working on?
Well, first of all, I don't think this is something that I'm actually very good at. Like,
Hmm.
I struggle with this a lot. I have a hard time kind of thinking about the reader in any useful kind of a way. Although I do totally agree that it matters. I just don't really have good answers for it. But I have a handful of people that I kind of write to
Hmm.
um, that are in my head, and I write things kind of for them, for like the composite of them.
Yeah.
like you're one of them. There's a handful of people that I will write something and be like, so and so will like this, so and so is definitely not going to like this.
Hmm.
But they're so I don't really write it to them, but I know what they'll think of it, you know.
That's interesting.
I'm kind of bouncing it off them, but sometimes I'm like, I know they're not going to like this,
What
but I'm
do you
writing it
you
anyway,
write it
you know.
anyways, right? You
Yeah,
write it anyways. I know this is gonna piss them off, but I'm writing it anyways.
yeah.
Is that
Well,
right?
not all of them. Like if the entire composite is going to be pissed off, that's something that I take that seriously. But that one member of it is going to be pissed off about it's just because I know these people. I know what they like and what they don't like, and I know that what I like and what they like don't like completely overlap.
Let me ask you this because I feel like this is a related question. Is there a book that you've read, maybe a work of fiction in particular, that as you read it, you were like, this writer really gets me. Like this writer, it feels like they've walked a mile in my shoes or something.
Yeah, I've had that feeling. It'll take me a minute to think of a specific book.
Yeah, I
Um,
know I'm putting you on the spot. I didn't like have this in the notes or anything. Like I just as you were talking, I thought like I hear what you're saying. I also it's a stretch for me to sometimes envision the reader, and there is a tension there because it's like if you start to envision a reader that you're someone who's close to you or whatever, like you can also start to imagine them not liking certain things that you wrote, and for me that's not necessarily a healthy place to be.
yeah,
Because like another thing I'll do, this is one of my personal pet peeves, things that I do as I'm gearing up to write something in terms of thinking about readers is like imagining myself giving an interview on the book and like saying all the smart writerly shit about the, pardon me, all the stupid stuff that one might say about their own work. That's not a healthy place for me to be. So I want to just kind of define the conversation a little bit for me, that when I'm talking about like what it means to think about the writer, or to a reader, or to imagine the reader, it's like it's this soul connection. So for me, one book that I really felt like I had that soul connection with was Dennis Johnson's Jesus' Son. For whatever reason, when I read that book, I had not been in recovery. I was still struggling with drug use and stuff, and I was working in a hospital, which I remember several of the stories. It was clear like someone had worked in a hospital who had written the book, and they got recovery, and it was like they were past the place that I was at, but they understood the place that I was at, and they were also a really good writer, and it hit me like on all three of those levels. So I really felt deeply known by that book and by Dennis Johnson. I had an opportunity to meet him once when I was in Austin. He was incredibly personable and nice, and um, still sober and all that, and great man. Which was not
cool.
always the case. And you get to meet your idols; they're not always wonderful people.
Yeah.
Um,
One
but
off the top of my head, one that was like that for me was The Body, the novella by Stephen King.
oh, really? I have not read that. Oh, the one that became Stand By Me is
Yeah,
that?
it's the one that
Yeah.
the film Stand By Me is based on. And I read it when I was just probably a little bit older than the kids in it are. I was
Wow.
probably in like junior high when I read it. Um, that just what you said about just like this book gets me. It's walked a mile in my shoes. I related a
Yeah.
lot to the kids in that story. Like their childhood felt to me a lot like my childhood.
Yeah. I think part of why it's important for us to it's I think about it. I mean, when I get really weird, it's like I do think that when we write, when we put ourselves in an imaginative space, when we create a setting, when we create characters that are relatable, we are we are tiptoeing around the astral plane. Like we're in some liminal space where this stuff might really exist. I don't know. Um, I start to think that some of it exists, and I'll even have moments where it's like, oh right, that didn't really happen. Um, and I think that's when writing is really working and doing its business. Um, but like for me, it's like, is there someone else on that other side, right? Like, so it's the astral plane is a place, right? Like it's just a setting, but who's there, right? Um, and I think that ideally the who's there, like the heart of whoever that is that reader's heart, that it is that person that can share that space with you if you're doing your job right. And so yeah, I think being as I'm reading books, like I pay attention to those moments when I arrive in that space with the writer, whether for good or for bad. And it's like that kind of tunes me into what they're about. Um, like there's moments I to go back to Stephen King, I'm reading The Stand right now, and that book it's a long book. It's a bit of a slog, but there's these moments in it where it's like, okay, I really get this. This is interesting, and he put a lot of his heart in this. I may not agree with everything in it or whatever, but his heart is here. And um so I think for me it's like an exercise of getting out of the head space and into the heart space while still maintaining the grammar and the rhetoric of the head space, right? um
Yeah.
and so it's like a conversation, I guess. Um so for this book that you're thinking about it working on in next month, like what is the who is the ideal reader?
Um, Probably you and my wife. It's it's a horror kind of detective novel hybrid.
Yeah, that sounds like something I would enjoy reading from you.
Yeah. So, and that's a thing where kind of the more gruesome the horror elements get, the more I'm going to be like, Britt is not
Ben's
going to
gonna,
like this.
but Ben's gonna love it.
Ben will like this, but Britt is not going to like
Like the
this.
angel and the devil on your shoulder.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Um, with the
I
with the
don't know.
extra,
I really struggle about imagining the reader. Um,
I think it's essential, man. I really do. I think especially um side
I
note,
guess
we
I'm
will come
just not
back to
sure
this.
what it's supposed to like mean. Like I know that I mean I definitely think you should consider the audience and I talk a lot in all kinds of contexts about the importance of kind of rhetorical appeal and rhetorical situation.
Yeah.
Um so I appreciate the importance of that a lot. But when I think about the stuff that I write and then I think like who reads this, I really struggle to have a like firm answer. What kind of person reads this?
I think, I mean, that's a good question, right? Like, because I think part of what it's driving at is like what are like the limits of this medium, this artistic medium? What are the advantage of this artistic medium? Like right now I'm reading A Man Called Uva. I'm actually listening to the audiobook of it. I
Mm,
cannot imagine how they made it into a film. Like I have zero interest in watching the film. Like after having read the book, it's like there's so much of what makes the book beautiful is that you're just in this guy's head who's completely taciturn and wouldn't like say two words to you over the course of 5 years of interactions. You know what I mean? Like that's the whole point of the book is you've got this stalwart, I guess he's Swedish man who, is just the silent man and you're in his head, thinking his thoughts. And it's like I have zero desire. I mean, Tom Hanks may be a great writer, art actor. I don't know. I don't want to get pilloried for saying otherwise, um, but I'm just not interested in watching Tom Hanks emote that. Like I'm much more interested in the consciousness there. And so I feel like literature, one of the advantages of literature is that it's consciousness raising. Like you are engaging with it in narrative fiction. You're engaging with a mental processes and with contemplation, the act of contemplation. That's essentially how this where the story comes from is through an act of intense contemplation. Versus movies, as much as I enjoy film, they're not about contemplation. They're not,
Yeah.
that's just not what they do. They don't do contemplation well. They do action well, they do colors well, they do things like that, emotive imagery, things like that. But they
Yeah.
don't really do contemplation. So limitations of a film, limitations of a novel. And so the ideal reader is going to be a contemplative person, right? But then you have to think, well, okay, what kind of thinker are we dealing with here, right? And so I think for me, like, it there's different ways of thinking. There's different ways of kind of using thought, right? So some people use thought, like I'm one of these. I'll just sit around and think about things all day long. I love to chase wormholes and all that, rabbit holes, I guess, and all that. Other people, it's like they think purely for action. They're just, if they're having a thought, it's like towards some end or some goal. Other people are more romantic in their thinking, and they're thinking like emotive type thinking and how to evoke certain feelings in others. Like other people think constantly about helping. And so kind of what I'm driving at is like, I think one of the ways that like helps me kind of consider who this ideal reader is, it is the Enneagram. Like I cheat, you know what I mean? And it's like this, like man called Uwe, like not to give away too much of the plot, but he's a suicidal individual. He's incredibly unhealthy. So it's like Tolstoy said, um, like what is it? Like good families are like all alike or whatever. I'm totally butchering this from Anna Karenina.
Yeah, it's
First line.
marriages. Good marriages are all the same, but tragic marriages are tragic in their own individual way or something like that.
Yeah. And I think the same way is with tragic individuals, right? So like, but I feel like Uva is like the ideal reader, or like kind of who the book is for is people who can relate to like Enneagram ones, Enneagram nines, Enneagram eights, somewhere in that area of type of personality or being in the world. Um, and if at this point, if you're watching this, you got zero clue what I'm talking about, that's fine. I'm going to put something together and we'll talk more about Enneagram, because I do think it can be a helpful tool. But I use that typology to be like, this book is going to be a book about an 8, or this book's going to be a book about a 7. Um, and then I at least have some idea what their values are, why they're engaging in contemplation, all of that. Yeah. I think for this one, I don't even, I at this point, like if you were to put me on the spot and ask me who my ideal reader is, I'd be like, I don't know. Nerdy video game people is all I got right now, you know?
Well, yeah, I
Um,
mean, what you've chosen is something, I feel like what you've chosen is something that kind of builds your ideal reader in for you.
yeah.
Like because you're taking something that already exists and then you're going to write a story inside of that world, right? Am I understanding
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm
So
basically saying
your
this
reader is
is the
people who like
genre.
that game, like,
Mm, yeah.
right?
I'm not doing this a specific game, but I'm doing a type of game. And so I guess my ideal reader is
I
like
see.
people who enjoy that type of game. Um,
Okay.
but my hope would be that like it actually is appealing to other people who have zero interest in that type of game as well. Um, did you ever read Wolf and White Van? It's a great
No,
book.
I'm not recognizing it offhand.
Um, it's interesting. It's about this very unhealthy individual who came up with a role playing game that it's like a mail order role playing game, and it just gets weirder and weirder from there. Um, but really great, interesting book. Um, but yeah, so I guess one advantage maybe that I have in my court is like I'm leaning really heavy into this niche genre, like lit RPG, and it's like I could probably further define it like male led lit RPG. So I could like really lean into that demographic and just say, yeah, people who read this book, you know, people who read Dungeon Crawler Carl, ideal readers. At least have some idea what the zeitgeist is for these individuals.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, but ultimately, the idea would be to that's just a starting point. That's just a starting point. I'm not writing to market. I'm not. That's not what I'm saying. Like I'm saying I'm just trying to picture who these individuals are. Um, for the longest time, like my ideal reader was just like people on planes.
I
Like I remember
remember that.
telling
I
you that.
remember you telling me about that. And I remember it
Yeah.
making me feel really depressed. It made me sad. I don't know why. Like it just gave me a sad feeling.
It was a very cynical view, right? Because it was like that's the only place that people read. Like I was convinced that was the only place that people read is like people on planes. Um, so it was a very cynical, snarky opinion.
Yeah. But I mean I do think that a lot of books are written to be read on planes.
Yeah,
Like the
certainly.
pacing of them is exactly that, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to approach an agent with a letter like I've written the perfect book for people who are on planes, they would be like, "Yes, tell me more." Um, well, on that cynical note, that's time. I'm not gonna.
Okay.
We can't be too negative here. We gotta keep it positive.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have this problem. This is a you problem.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I am I am sorry. I'm also thankful. I'm so maybe that's like a cheesy but kind of true last thing to say on this point, like a parting shot as it were, is like I think it is important, like not just to imagine this reader, but to like be grateful for them, like to approach it with
Yes.
gratitude. You know what I mean? Like I'm grateful that I'm clothed and in my right mind, and today I get to write, and I'm grateful for this person who's going to read what I have to
I
write
do too.
and reconstruct these things and engage in these thoughts, you know? Um,
And I think that at least for me, that helps you kind of have a feeling of if you're overriding or like, because I appreciate this person, I don't want to take advantage of their time. I don't want to waste their time. I don't want to, you know, I want to tell them a good story.
yeah,
Um, it
I want to
puts
be
you in that
concise
place
because I
where
want to be respectful of it. Yeah, that's good. I want,
it
you know,
kind
I
of
want to,
cuts down on the self-indulgence and the, you know, going maybe too far down tangents, at least during revision. Like when I'm writing, I'll go down all the tangents, but when I'm
yeah,
revising, I'm thinking about I want to be respectful of people's time, you know.
that's good. Well, on that note, let's say good night. Next week, Tuesday, we'll get back and let me think real quick what we're going to look at. Oh, character theory. So it's your this is like so two things here. We might have to do two separate ones, but character theory being like your cocktail napkin idea of what a character is. Like how you build your main character might be one way to think about it. Um, but do you have a theory? And I actually do. I'm gonna have a little drawing. It's gonna look terrible because it's literally gonna be like a cocktail napkin drawing. It might have to be
That's
something
going to
I
be
do in
awesome.
paint. Um, but I have a theory, and I'm curious if you have a theory or what kind of how you get into characters. And in that wrap, I think feel like wrapped in that is like the promise that's made to the reader. You know what I mean? Like that we're gonna make a promise about where the story's going and whether they can. I mean, I think within the first few paragraphs, we're establishing that we are a trusted voice to deliver on this character and on this story, right? That the reader can
Yeah.
trust us, that we're going to make decisions that are trustworthy. Um, so building trust, but the promise to the reader. So that's what I want. I think that we should look at those things next week. Um, thank you, man. I love you. I appreciate you so much. Um,
Yeah. You too.
we'll be back for more.